All right, guys. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna kind of just for briefly step out of being a U.S. history course and deal with a little bit of world history, because what I want to do now before we get into World War II, which the next two lectures will be about, I just want to briefly discuss how we get there. And remember, one of your ID terms is the Versailles Treaty. The significance I'm looking for is that it leads to World War II because we're going to see that it in part it creates such an imbalance that's going to let a guy like Adolf Hitler come to power. But well before Hitler gets to power, we have to deal with this man, Benito Mussolini. This guy will take power in 1922 in Italy. And he had been this guy's all over the spectrum. He was a socialist during World War One. He had served in the army. He had been a newspaper guy, and then now he becomes what he's going to call a fascist. And it takes its name from the ancient Roman fasci, which it's a bundle of sticks put together. And the idea being, if you have one stick, you can break it, but if you put a bundle together, you can't break it. It reinforces the whole, and so you can't break it. And he said this is what society needs to do. Never mind what the individual wants. If all of society works together, okay, then the society cannot be broken. There cannot be chaos. There must be order. But the order must be maintained ruthlessly, and so it's going to happen through repression. And we're going to see there's going to be all sorts of political repression. There won't be nearly as much as in Nazi Germany. Okay, understand there's no racial component here. They don't have a bad guy in the form of Jews. In fact, even though Italy will side with Nazi Germany, they will, Benito Mussolini, a Jew was an Italian first. And this even would piss off the Germans. But we're going to see that with Italy, the repression you have to maintain, because again, we're literally saying that everything must be given to the government. There's still going to be some political murders. People are going to be silenced that speak out. Mussolini will shoot his own son-in-law, which I'm glad my mother-in-law is not a fascist, because she would not mind shooting me. She actually almost tried once. That's a funny thing. Not to get too rednecky. But apparently some people tried to break into her house once. This was years ago. So they're like, well, okay, let's ask Justin. He's a gun owner, So will you, loan us a gun? Which there's a bunch of red flags. But I said, okay, I will help you purchase a firearm if I train you how to use it. I'm not just giving you a gun. So there's nothing like we go out to an outdoor gun range and then, my wife has to go do something. So there I am with my mother-in-law who hates my guts, who has a loaded pistol and holds it gangster style, while it's loaded, finger on the trigger, pointing it at me, going, now what do I do again? You give me the damn gun, that's what you do again. So just for the record, please, when you get married, don't be as dumb as I am. Do not give your in-laws loaded weapons. I have never made that same mistake twice. That is one I will not make twice. But this guy he's really he's self-critical. He creates a cult of personality. He'll say things like, we need to build a new Roman Empire. Okay, if we look at Italy in 1939, okay, well, let's actually turn the clock back. Let's look 1922. Okay, you have mainland Italy, you have Corsica, you have Sicily, you have, actually, is that Sardinia? Yeah, one of the two. You've got Libya, and then you've got Italian Somaliland down here. But he will say, no, we need Mare Nostrum, our sea, what the ancient Romans called the Mediterranean. He literally wants North Africa, parts of the Middle East, and then the southern parts of Europe is one big new Italian empire. He says he wants to create an army of 8 million bayonets to, help control the world. But the system, it's weak, it's flawed. He can never change the mind of the average Italian. Most Italians think, oh, Mussolini, he's just a windbag politician. Again, no racial component. The government has a crappy economy. He can't fix the problems that let him come in, because the Italian economy post-World War I was absolutely crap. Never mind that, Italy's on the winning side in World War I. The Italian economy just was not there. So Italy starts the ball rolling. But then we have to look at something far, far, far more dangerous, and that's going to be the rise of Nazi Germany. Now, with Nazi Germany, it's fascism to another extent, but now it's with a racial component. And Hitler can come into power, because remember, you've got the Versailles Treaty, you've got the ineffective Weimar government, you've got all of these Oh, I literally just went brain dead. Reparations. There we go. Saying repercussions. Jeez. Wartime reparations. You've got to pay all this money back. The economy is in the toilet. And so we see that, Hitler can be elected democratically. I forgot an image, so actually I'm going to pause it really quick because I forgot something that I really need to put up right now. So wait one. All right, there we go. Sorry, one of the things I like to do in my traditional class, if something pops in, I just like to pull it up on the computer. Here we can still do it, but I've got to do these awkward pauses. But with Hitler, he gets power in part because he's seen almost as a demigod. And the issue with Hitler, and we see this in the early 1920s when we have the beer hall putsch in Munich in the early 1920s, is he will, promise to make Germany great again. He promises to end the Versailles Treaty. He promises that he can make your life better. And when you're poor, when you're starving, when you're unemployed, these things sound good. But for many, they were seen as fantasy land, and so he's going to be thrown into Landsberg prison, where he's going to then write Mein Kampf. And when he's done, the world doesn't take him seriously. I don't know if it's the tiny mustache or what, but the world didn't take him seriously. We're going to have this article from 1924, if it loads. There we go. From the New York Times. Hitler tamed by prison. Adolf Hitler, blah, 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 blah. Much sadder and wiser man. His behavior during imprisonment convinced the authorities that, like his political organization, known as the Völkische Proto-Nazi Party, was no longer to be feared. It is believed he will retire to private life and return to Austria, the country of his birth. Don't believe everything you read in the newspaper, kids. Though that being said, does anybody even read a newspaper anyway? Anyways, details. Now, what we're going to see is Hitler doesn't retire. He keeps charge of the Nazi Party. They're going to form the SA, the Sturmabteilung, and they're going to, these are basically, a paramilitary organization. They're going to try to coerce people for votes. What they're going to do is go through the streets and say, hey, you need a job? Come work for us. We'll feed you. Join the Nazi Party. We'll give you a job. And people, more or less gave up, if you will, any sense of decency they had for a short-term fix. Understand, one of the things we have to deal with is the myth of the good German. The idea that, well, not all Germans were Nazis. What's the phrase? Ich bin kein Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. Well, the fact is most Germans were not members of the Nazi Party. That part is true. But the thing is, the overwhelming did go along with it. Anti-Semitism was already there. Okay, anti-Semitism had been in Europe for, centuries. Here's the thing, the next time, and I did get on my soapbox a little bit about the Syrian things, but if somebody tells you, hey, there was nothing wrong with the Crusades, they were a defense against Muslims, well, maybe, but consider this, when they marched to the Middle East, the Christian Crusaders slaughtered Jews on their way in Europe. Anti-Semitism has been in Europe for time immemorial. And so the thing is that they could tap that. And they tap it by saying, well, look, the Jews stabbed us in the back. The Jews caused World War I. The Jews are the cause of all your problems. The Jews are keeping the economy down. And doing all of this, people were willing to say, okay, you know what? We will trade our decency for this. Sure, we know that you made the Jews the bad guys. We know early on, after Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933, then, after the death of Paul von Hindenburg and the Reichstag fire, assumes dictatorial powers, becomes der Führer for life, the leader. And we see that the Jews are thrown into, there's a newspaper article from 34, 35, when they institute the newspaper or the Nuremberg laws, which basically say that Jews are no longer citizens, Jews can't hold these type of jobs, and you cannot marry, Jews cannot marry non-Jews. We see they're thrown back to the Middle Ages, and the average German citizen is fine with this. They told themselves, well, it'll pass, or it'll blow over. So that myth of the good German comes in, that's a Cold War creation. Because, and hopefully we'll get there, but one of the things we're going to see is, we have to defend West Germany. With that, we have to defend West Berlin, which is in the middle of communist East Berlin. We're afraid that the communists are going to invade. So we believe the Third World War would once again begin in Germany, only this time they wouldn't be the aggressors. And now we have nuclear weapons. And the thing is, the Soviets in let's say 1962. Let's go Cuban Missile Crisis. They have a bigger army than we do. So our battle plan, they invade Berlin. We then respond with tactical nuclear weapons. Yes, those exist. They then respond with strategic nukes. We respond with strategic nukes. Boom, the world of Fallout has just become a reality. In order to get people to be okay with, or at least not complain about risking nuclear Armageddon to defend Germany, we had to say that, well, in actuality, no, not every German was a Nazi. But the fact is, most Germans in the 30s and 40s buy into it, and Hitler gets full and complete power. Bear in mind, when people think he's assassinated in the July 20, 1944 plot, most Germans are crying. Most Germans are sad. He was der Führer. He was the guy that was making, in their eyes, Germany great again. So now you have Germany. Then we need to deal with fascist Japan, where Japan also has the same turbulent economic problems. And they give the army the power. They say, you know what, okay, army, you take it. You militarize the government. Do whatever you need. And the army wanted to create what they're going to call the East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. They've got stuff in the Pacific now. And then they're going to decide, okay, well, we want Manchuria. Then we want parts of China. And we want to take over this block of Asia and create a, kind of a pan-Asian place that's, a set aside from Western European influence. But understand, the Japanese are racist. And, they think the whites are subhuman, but they also think non-Japanese Asians. Consider this, we're building up to it. More Chinese will die at the hands of the Imperial Japanese Army than Jews in the Holocaust. That's how bad it is. And with this, we see this is actually the first, it predates Hitler, but this is the first, kind of footnote in what's going to happen. They attack Manchuria, September 18, 1931. The Japanese army crosses the border, blows up a section of railroad track owned by a Japanese company, says the Manchurians blew up this, stretch of track, and boom, they invade, take Manchuria, and instill the puppet state of Manchukuo. And it's from that they're then going to fight the Soviets for a little bit, and they're going to launch their war in Asia. The problems are already beginning, but 1931, the rest of the world is gripped in the throes of the Great Depression, and so we are isolationists. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to deal with this worldwide problem because several things. Remember how I said World War I was hated after the war? The thought amongst not just the United States, but the whole world was this concept of what was called never again. This idea that World War I was just so bad, that so many people died, and for nothing, none of the problems were resolved, that how could anything be worth it? How could anything be worth a repeat? So if Japan wants to fight China, let them do it. That was the theory. You've got the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl here in the United States. We can't do anything. We're also still naive. Okay, despite the fact the Japanese. Okay, here's Marcus Island. Well, guess what? Wake Island is American. Over here is Midway Island. Over here is Hawaii. Despite the fact that we're close, okay, we still think that the Atlantic and the Pacific will save us. We're looking at this very Civil War era mindset, completely ignorant of the fact the Philippines are ours. We have ships patrolling the Yangtze River in China. Okay, we have stuff here in Midway. We have stuff in Hawaii. Okay, we forget the fact that when Europe went to war, it affected us. We want to ignore all of that. In fact, we're going to try some disarmament conferences. 1922, we say let's scrap a bunch of battleships. 1930, let's further reduce our, in the London Naval Treaty, let's further reduce our naval stuff. 1928, we partner with the French. In the Kellogg-Briand Pact, we literally outlaw war. We say that warfare is no longer an acceptable means to seek redress for problems. Does it last? No. Does every nation on the world sign it? Of course not. But it's enough that we can pat ourselves on the back and say, okay, well, I think we've done good. I think these are things that we can do. Now, there's also a bit of pacifism. Okay, people are so afraid of another World War I that there's movements to abolish the ROTC. Movies constantly remind people, hey, this is how bad war is. We see All Quiet on the Western Front. And I'm going to spoil it for you, but the plot is, okay, a 17-year-old kid is coerced to volunteer around 1915 by, his school teacher. He fights through the whole war. He becomes desensitized, loses all of his friends. Then in 1918, 3 weeks before the armistice, he sees a butterfly. And for one brief moment at, let's see, 17, at 20, relapses into the childhood he never had. He's a butterfly collector. Reaches out to get it, gets shot in the face and killed by a French sniper. The plot is, if you go to war, you're either going to die or you will be so emotionally scarred that you cannot contribute to society. And so what we're going to see, the big takeaway from all of this, is that the United States becomes disinterested in world affairs at the exact moment that intervention is necessary. Okay? This isn't like World War I, where you have 1 month of warning and then boom, the world, the declarations of war happen, and then within 5 days the world is at war. This is a case of 1935 to 1939. There are numerous events that, had people intervened, things might have come out differently. I don't know if it'll be like the old Command & Conquer Red Alert, where the Soviets are going to start World War III in a really fantastic game series, or what, but things could have gone down differently. But they don't. In 1935, Mussolini, realizing that, 13 years of fascism haven't fixed a damn thing, let's instead start, let's rebuild Mare Nostrum. Let's get that Roman Empire. So they invade Ethiopia. I'm going to pause it one more time because I just realized unfortunately, I have like 5 versions of this lecture. My 1103, my 1493, and my 3333, which, by the way, I hope to see some of you guys in my World War II course. If not online in the spring, I hope some of you guys want to take it in the August intersession. I'd love to have you. But wait one right here, and I'm going to be right back. All right, now we're good. So they invade Ethiopia. Okay, sorry, I just forgot where I left my. So they want the Mare Nostrum. Okay, and a good war will distract you from social problems. So 1935, they invade Ethiopia. Now here's the thing: Italy has something of a modern army. They have modern artillery. They have modern weapons, machine guns. Right now, armored warfare is not evolved, so the current fad is the tankette, which basically, imagine a car-sized tank that you can barely fit 2 people in. That's what they're using. But the Ethiopians, some rifles, but many units have to use spears. Okay, this is, a one-sided conflict. And so, remember that whole League of Nations thing. Haile Selassie, the Emperor of India, goes to the League of Nations, begs for assistance, says, you guys must do something. This is why you guys exist. And the League passes sanctions against Italy, and that's it. Imagine, if you will, the scene from Team America, where Hans Blix, goes to Kim Jong-il and says, you must show me your nuclear weapons, or else. Or else what? I don't know why I just Batman voice, but there you go. Or else we will write you a letter telling you how very, very angry we are. It's kind of what the League of Nations did. So Italy will take over Ethiopia. Now, by the way, OSU has a connection to Ethiopia because post-war, then Oklahoma Agricultural Mechanical College helped to rebuild Ethiopia. And if you go to the West Watkins Center, we have a number of artifacts because OSU really took the lead in that before Selassie was deposed in favor of communist regime. But hey, that's the Cold War. We'll get back to that. So why this is a problem? It's the failure of collective security. Okay, the League is bankrupt. Nobody's going to do anything. You can flaunt treaties, you can invade your neighbor, and nobody's going to do anything. So Adolf Hitler sees that. And I'm going to go back to my map. Give me a second. By the Versailles Treaty, okay, the Rhineland was supposed to be demilitarized. If one German soldier set foot, then the French could invade without warning. Hitler sees what happens in Ethiopia and decides, you know what, let's take a gamble. So he invades. He sends troops into the Rhineland. Those troops are ordered, if the French cross the border, run like hell, drop your guns, and get the hell out. Not one French soldier crosses the border. They're paralyzed by this idea of never again. So they do nothing. And so what we've learned, Italy can invade Ethiopia, nothing happens. The Germans can then cross into the Rhineland, nothing happens. And so we see that now, okay, the pretext is set for conflict. And we see that happen in 1936 with the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War. Now, why this is important, and unfortunately I am going to have to cut the lecture short, so I'm going to, not going to spend too much time on this, but the Germans are violating treaties. They are rearming. And in the Spanish Civil War, okay, you have the nationalists under Francisco Franco who rebel against the Spanish Republic. And the nationalists are fascists. And so they get help from Germany and Italy. They will send tanks, planes, troops, and all of this aid. The Soviets pour stuff in for the Republicans. Even on the United States, we're going to send guys in. And, for us, it sucks. We form an Abraham Lincoln Battalion, all volunteer. But when they come back, they run afoul of the fact they technically fought for a communist, and so we distrust them. We're eventually going to call them premature anti-fascists. I think they have a pill for that. But it's this idea that, well, it's good you fought fascism, but you fought it a little too soon, so no, we're not going to need your help in the army. Why this is an issue, though, for our purposes, is how can the Germans send tanks if they're not supposed to build tanks? The Versailles Treaty specifically says they cannot build tanks. What the Germans would do with their early tanks is they would build this armored vehicle with machine guns, and they say, oh, it's an agricultural tractor. If that exists, if there is a freaking tractor with a machine gun on it, I quit this job. I'm going to go be a farmer. There, I harvested the corn. Just saying, it's going to be a hell of a lot more fun than this. Well, we can't build planes. Let's have gliders. What happens if you put an engine on a glider? Oh, it's a plane. How'd that happen? Can't build submarines. Fine, we'll build them for other nations in secret. All of this stuff. The Germans blatantly, remember, my thing, they're not allowed to build new weapons, but hey, here's a weapon built in 1935 before they were supposed to do it. 1936, Hitler just renounces the Versailles Treaty. He says, you know what? No, to hell with the Versailles Treaty. We are going to rearm. The British response was to cut treaties with them, allowing it, saying, well, if they're going to do it, maybe we can at least limit how much they're going to rearm. All this tells Hitler is he can get away with it. In the Spanish Civil War, you can have things like the bombing of Guernica, which will, lead to this interesting Pablo Picasso painting. And this idea that now German bombers have the ability to destroy cities, and the world does nothing. By the way, cheap joke. You go into a doctor's office, they have paintings, right? If you're Ronda Rousey, which 2 jokes actually, and she needs to have plastic surgery. My advice to you, if you ever have to have plastic surgery, don't go into a doctor's office with a guy with a Pablo Picasso painting. You don't know what you're going to get. My other bad Ronda Rousey joke, which, I think she's cool, whatever. I don't know why she's a fad, but hey, there you go. But, again, bad political joke, but, 5 days before she lost the fight, she endorsed Bernie Sanders, which, yeah, it's cool. But hey, at least she practiced what she preached. She endorsed the socialist and then redistributed the championship. I mean, I can respect that. So, okay, but so what we're going to see, okay, the war in Spain is heating up. You now have all of this stuff. And what we're going to see is the American response is the Neutrality Act. We're going to get 3 of them, 35, 36, and 37. And basically, we proclaim our neutrality. Initially, we're going to say, no, we're not going to sell weapons or anything. We're going to learn from the First World War. But there's money to be made there. So in 1937, we come up with what's called cash and carry. The idea if you're fighting a war, I'm not going to give you credit. I'm not going to give you weapons. But if you were to bring your own ship over, pay me cash, and then take the stuff back, take all the stuff you want. Now, FDR initially wants more. But this is all he can get and maintain the New Deal. And what we're going to see is why this is also important is, the U.S., it's still isolationist. We don't want full-on intervention. But FDR wants to do something. FDR really, 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 really hates Nazis. That's okay. Hitler thought his name was Rosenfeld and thought he was a Jew. So you can imagine the love lost there. But it's this idea, things are starting to boil towards a big war in Europe. And nobody is trying to stop it. That whole idea of collective security doesn't really work. And then we get events in the Far East. And here is where it's going to start getting pretty heavy. Every time I say that, I think Marty McFly, what is it, Back to the Future? Heavy, heavy. Are things heavier than the future? Okay. Funny joke. I haven't told the wife joke yet, which, by the way, I don't know if it's this class or other, but somebody's going to get me in trouble because on Rate My Prof, somebody mentioned how much they like my wife jokes, which I'm glad you do. That's why I tell them, but I'm just like, if she sees this, that couch is going to be lumpy. So for that, another wife joke. Why? Because I can. I love my wife, but I think she grew up under a rock. She did not see Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, or Star Wars until we were married. And we were only married like 5 years ago. And it took her in the last half. She's a child of the 80s and had not seen this stuff. Huh? So please, please remember, take a moment and make sure you educate your friends. The other thing I've seen, she's made me watch Pitch Perfect so many. This is why I do wife jokes, to get back at her. Pitch Perfect so many times I can quote the damn movie. So remember, friends, give your spouses a movication if you need. Which, by the way, yes, I had to take her to see the second one opening night. Yes, she bought it the day it came out. And yes, I'm going to have to take her to the third one, when it comes out. But hey, the price, I don't sleep on the couch, so it's win-win. But getting back, the Sino-Japanese War breaks out in 1937. Okay, we've got a few actions in China early on in the 30s, a few kind of bombings. World does nothing. Then in 37, okay, because China had been fighting a civil war since 1911, the Japanese just launch a massive invasion, and it bogs down. And bogs down in part because, understand, the Japanese islands are not rich in raw materials. They have to get it from China. They have to buy it from us, and they are. And also, China is just freaking vast. It's like invading the Soviet Union. Stay tuned. You've got to go through a lot of stuff. But we're also going to see that whole racist component. The Chinese are going to suffer brutally at the hands of the Japanese. Okay, we're going to see in December 1937, when the Japanese take Nanking, we're going to see what's called the Nanking Massacre, the rape of Nanking. 250,000 to 300,000 Chinese are going to be murdered, raped, tortured. Beheadings were common. It was said the first few days after the Japanese took the city, so many people were beheaded that you could not find a Japanese soldier that didn't have blood on his uniform, and the streets literally ran red with blood. I mean, and we're not talking, combatants. We're talking civilians. Civilians were just beheaded. There's a number of photos. I thought about putting them in, but they're all ghastly. One I even just saw for the first time today. And it's because the Japanese documented everything. That's the weird thing about fascists, communists, and Nazis. They do all these war crimes, but they document them. And it's the scene of a naked woman. And I can't tell if she's like holding her leg because she's sitting down or holding a baby. She's naked. But there's blood being splattered because a Japanese officer has held her hair and has just cut her head off. And the sword is, it's already down here by the time of the picture. Her head is literally just been severed, and you can see the scream on her face. And that's the kind of just war crimes and atrocities that come out. They're going to fling diseased rats into cities to try to just, again, it's, German chemical warfare. The world knows what's going on. We see it on the newsreels. But the world doesn't want to do anything because, again, we don't want to fight a war in Asia. We don't want to fight a war in Europe. And we get close to fighting a war in Asia at this point. The same month, Japanese dive bombers attack and sink the American gunboat Panay in 1937. And what we're going to see with this is the sinking of the gunboat Panay, okay? This almost leads to an international incident. There are flags all over it. There's a news crew all over it. The Japanese sink it. They don't apologize. They do kill Americans. But even that coupled with the atrocities of Nanking is still not enough to, catapult the United States into war. Now, I'm going to try to sneak what jokes in I can, but it's World War II. You think this is bad? Try doing a 2-week course of it. Geez, when we talk about the Holocaust. I wanted to see if I could just pass out antidepressants because we were all so sad. But when I can, when there's glimmers of hope or at least something funny, I try to point them out. And thankfully, the Panay gives us that. If you take life advice from this class, don't go to bed naked. Okay, I'm sure plenty of you are like, what the hell? There was, as I said, there was a news crew on the Panay, and when it happened, they sounded battle stations, and when the Japanese wouldn't break off the attack, the gunboat opened fire. And so captured for all to see is a guy who has only gone down in history as Pantsless Gunner. Nobody knows who he was, nobody knows his name, but he woke up, have to get to your battle station, not wearing clothes, so fine, throw a shirt on, throw a life jacket on, and, tackle out, blaze away at Japanese aircraft. So my advice to you is, again, if you don't want your ass on national TV, at least go to bed with boxers or something. Wear some sort of underpants. That's my one good joke I can, get in here. But again, we have to then get to the start of the Second World War. And a lot of this, we're not going to go over some of this. It's just for, your reference in the slide. But I do want to at least get through the invasion of Poland. And what we're going to see is in 1938, in clear violation of the already renounced Versailles Treaty, the Germans will annex Austria. Again, think The Sound of Music, which, Okay, random question. Since when does a movie about singing nuns running away from a Nazi invasion become a Christmas movie? Think about it. That movie only ever pops up in Christmas, but no. I mean, I just wondered, do you show this to some Austrian person and, Austrian's like, I remember that going down very definitely, and Rolf was an asshole. What do Austrians think of this? I think it's a legitimate question. So they capture Austria. Now, this should have been a clue of what Hitler wants to do, but the world does nothing. Then in 1938, Hitler decides he wants Czechoslovakia. So he says, okay, I want the Sudetenland. I want this region here with ethnic German-speaking people. Most of them don't want to be in Germany. But Hitler threatens war. He threatens that by September 1938, he will go to war if he doesn't get it. So in September, the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, and Italy meet in Munich, Germany. Now here's a question. Who's not there? Every time I ask that, somebody's like, well, America, well, Russia. Yeah. What about the Czechs? The Czechs aren't there either. They're not even invited to attend the dismemberment of their own country. And so guys like this, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain, agree that Czechoslovakia must cede the Sudetenland. When the Czechs say no, he says, look, if you guys go to war, we're not going to support you. You'll not stand. Give up the Sudetenland, and that's it. So they agree. German troops cross the border. And with the Sudetenland, they have the most defensible part of the country. And then Chamberlain does probably the dumbest thing a human being has ever done. He gets out in front of his microphone and he says, I've just gotten back from the meeting with Herr Hitler. And I have this signed piece of paper that says that Herr Hitler wants no more territory in Europe. This is peace in our time. That's in September 1938. In March, the Deutsche Wehrmacht, the German war machine, crosses the border and takes over the rest of Czechoslovakia. By March 1939, it is blatantly obvious there is going to be a war, and nobody has done anything to stop it. Later that year, Hitler starts making claims on Danzig, which had historically been German, but was given to Poland so they could actually have access to the sea. And the Germans say, no, we want Danzig back. We want this back. And so what we're going to see, the League of Nations does nothing. Never again. This idea that war is just too bad has so infected everybody that they don't want to, that they're like, no, we're not going to do it. And so what we're going to see is that, collective security has failed. The League failed to stop Germany. The Russians had wanted to stop him when he went into Austria, wanted to stop him with Sudetenland. By 39, they're willing to sign a non-aggression pact because they say, look, you guys are idiots. We're going to look for our own best interest. Britain and France now decide they need to contain Germany. They sign an alliance with Poland. But the thing is, put yourself in the place of Adolf Hitler. Not the Adolf Hitler getting a pineapple shoved up your butt from, Little Nicky. Oh, God, does anybody even... Where the hell did... I haven't even thought about that movie in like 20 years. But, If you look at Germany, okay, look at from Hitler's perspective. The Allies do nothing with the Rhineland. The Allies do nothing with Austria. The Allies do nothing with Sudetenland. The Allies do nothing with Czechoslovakia. Why would the Allies do something with Poland? And that's the thought Hitler believes. So in 39, he signs a non-aggression pact. He even says, we're going to divide Poland. And on September the 1st, okay, 1939, German ships, planes, troops, tanks, planes, the whole thing, cross the border and attack Poland. Now, the Allies immediately say, okay, get your stuff out of Poland. If not, we're going to be at war by September 3rd. Hitler thought they were bluffing, and so Britain and France declare war. This starts the Second World War. The Polish army is small, it's weak. It can't stand against new blitzkrieg tactics, new things like the Panzer III and the Panzer IV. And so what we're going to see is that the Germans, with their new lightning war, which, by the way, the term lightning war, blitzkrieg, is actually coined by an American journalist in Poland, is this changes warfare. The idea is a short, quick, brief war. Mid-September, the Soviets cross the border and invade Poland as well, and under these two big military powers, Poland cannot stand and surrenders in October. We're also going to see that this is going to be a darker war, because immediately the war atrocities begin. Jews will be executed. Random Jewish or Polish civilians will be executed under the idea of Lebensraum, which Hitler writes down in 1924 in Mein Kampf what he's going to do, and nobody listens. He says that we need living space in the East. We need, we need territory here to colonize. And to do that, we have to shoot and starve out all, the people who live there so we can settle Germans. This is going to be a war of atrocities, and nobody listens. Now, I want to wrap this up in part because I've got, believe it or not, I still have 2 more makeup exams to proctor. But I want to, I've included some slides in case you just want like a brief about the Sitzkrieg, invasion of Britain, invasion of France, just to know that they're standing alone, which is why we start to get involved. But the tipping point for World War II is honestly going to be the invasion of the Soviet Union. And we're not going to talk about it that much. It's here for your own, thing. But understand, just the amount of people thrown in the war on the Eastern Front, okay? Just the vast sizes, the fact that the Russian army can lose, 5.7 million prisoners of war, okay? 5.7. They take in numbers of prisoner of war 1/3 what we as a nation will put in uniform, and they can still survive, okay? That's not mentioning killed, that's just surrendered, okay? This ties down the German army. This is their fatal mistake. 1941, they're fighting in Africa. They've taken the Balkans. They've taken most of Europe. They've been rebuffed in Britain. But the German, they're doing good. And they throw it all the way, invading the Soviet Union. And so, understand, the war is going to be won there because what we do is great. We prop up the Soviet Union. Nikita Khrushchev, who was a general, he's the guy, Bob Hoskins and Enemy at the Gates. It means they're beginning to shit their pants. That's, Nikita Khrushchev. He's also going to be the general secretary of the Communist Party during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he will say, without spam, the Soviet army would not have been able to win the war. Which, no offense, if you're so hard up that spam's how you live, your army's pretty crappy. I'm just saying. But what we're going to see is the war will be won in the East simply because of the sizes of stuff involved. Now, if we look at the United States, we start to cast off our neutrality. By 1940, most people have finally come around and say, look, we need, if not to get involved, we need to make sure the Allies win. We begin sending aid to Britain. We're getting the destroyers for bases deal because the Germans, once again using U-boats, they've got to starve Britain. We say, fine, give us bases in the Caribbean that we don't even need. We'll give you 50 old World War I destroyers. We start a peacetime draft, rapidly expand the military. By 1941, to help keep Britain, in action, we start escorting convoys through half of the Atlantic to cut down, how far British ships have to go. We start fighting an undeclared naval war with Germany. We're going to lose a destroyer, the Reuben James, Halloween night, 1941. It's all but a shooting war. But we don't want to go to war. We can't cross that line, but we can help keep Britain in action. Then in July, American public opinion, slides against Japan. And they say, look, we cannot allow you to keep doing these atrocities. You've been fighting in China since 1937 with no end in sight, so we embargo oil and raw materials. Why that's important is that's what's going to cause the Japanese to want to then invade, or not invade, but to attack Pearl Harbor, because they then have to go invade what we'll call the Southern Resource Area, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, what we call Indonesia today. But because we're tied to it, we're going to come into war, so they know that they have to destroy the American Pacific Fleet. And the last thing I want to end up on, we'll put Pearl Harbor in with the Pacific Lecture, because that will better help set up Executive Order 9066, is that if we look at our aid, we start to become much, much, much more overt. Congress approves Lend-Lease, which is the loaning or the leasing of any military equipment that the president deems fit for American national security. What this means is we'll build tanks for Britain, and we'll lend them there saying, well, when you're done with it, give it back to us. There's going to be a senator who will say, that's like giving somebody chewing gum. You don't expect it back. The tank's going to be old, obsolete, or shot full of holes. No, we're not going to want it back. Not everybody likes it, but this is critical to an Allied victory, because it means that we're going to give Britain stuff they need well before we get into war. Once the Soviet Union's intact, we'll give the Soviets stuff before we're in war. And even when we're out, in the war, we become what FDR will call the arsenal of democracy. Putting all, bankrolling everybody else, giving them guns, weapons, artillery, tanks, planes. Whereas in World War I, we couldn't supply our own stuff. Now we're going to supply everybody. And it shows that, hey, we are committed to the Allied war effort. We're not going to do this for the Japanese. We're not going to do this for the Italians or, the Germans. But what we're going to see is by casting off all pretense of neutrality, that's why we have that undeclared naval war. And that's why the Japanese are going to feel that they need to attack Pearl Harbor. So I need to run, so we'll move a date which will live in infamy to the Pacific Lecture. How World War II will shake out, we'll talk about the Pacific, and then we'll talk the war in Europe at home, and then how we end it, or I might reverse those, we'll figure it out. But stay tuned for the next lecture, which I'll post this weekend. Remember, your homework was due today, Friday, November 20. And also, remember, you've got your term paper coming up. As always, if you've got questions, let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.